Give me your take on 115. I know that there's a story that Bob stole some from S4 and brought it home, which is an incorrect assumption on the part of a lot of people. But you got to see this stuff and what it could do in a fairly interesting experiment involving a cloud chamber, right?
Yeah, we took a regular bell jar and some dry ice, and we put the element 115. It was in the little. We didn't steal it. Somebody gave it to him from Los Alamos, and we put out the story that he stole it, so we wouldn't implicate the guy that gave it to us from Los Alamos.
John, wasn't that code name like LA 1000 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, put the 115 on the dry ice, and then we hung the Coleman lantern mantle, which has thorium in it, and the gist of the experiment, the reason we did that was to see the attractive properties of 115. Could it deflect the alpha particles being emitted from the thorium emitter? And it did. We videotaped it, and the cloud chamber, the dry ice made the clouds so that we could see the particles in what direction they're going. And of course, they're going straight out at 1 million miles an hour, and there's nothing that should deflect them. But in fact, the particles, at least one of them, was deflected, and we caught that on videotape. Now, the question is, where's the videotape? Now, I know that Bob has a copy, and you had a copy, and it's like many things in this stuff. They just seem to disappear. All the really hard evidence disappears.
Well, I've got it somewhere. I just don't know where it is in this big pile of stuff.
Was the 115 still inside of that clamshell holder during this experiment?
The little lead thing that Bob made?
Yeah. Well,
he took it out of there.
No, there was a clam shell that it actually came in because it had to be kept under neutron bombardment when it was at rest. I mean, it wasn't just a little thing that Bob made. Remember
there was a lead container that Bob kept the 115. I don't know about the clamshell thing, but
there was a clamshell thing with whatever neutron emitter on the inside of it. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I know the 115 had to be kept under neutron bombardment at rest for whatever reason, and there was a casing that it came in. I mean, I don't know that that's the same one you're talking about.
I didn't see the casing. Okay. I just saw the little arrowhead shape that put on the dry ice, and there was me, Joe Vananetti, and Bob, and I think Jim Taliani was there.
Gene, did you ever see 115 out of the case?
No, not out of the case. I saw the case, though.
You've heard the stories about. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll hold this till after the break. But I want to go into the stories about 115 because it's now a real element. It wasn't back then. It came out of the sky, an appropriate song for this time period. We'll be back with more of Gene Huff and John Lear, and maybe a call from Bob Lazar. We still have our fingers crossed. I'm George Knapp. This is Coast to Coast AM. We're talking with John Lear and Gene Huff about the early days of the Area 51 story, how it all came about. In particular, one of the linchpins of the story is this mysterious, magical element called 115. At the time Bob Lazar first mentioned it to me, I was no scientist, but I was smart enough to know that the periodic table didn't go that high. There was no such thing. Now, there is. However, the 115 that's been created in a lab is far different from what Bob Lazar described back then. When we come back, we'll pick up the conversation there about what they saw with the 115, and we might even get into where that piece of stuff is now. Stay with us for more Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. My name is George Knapp. We're talking with John Lear and Gene Huff about the Area 51 story, the Bob Lazar story, and a key factor in that story is the information about something called Element 115. As I mentioned before that break, I had first been told about it and said, well, it doesn't exist, Bob. And he comes back and says, well, it's theorized that there is an island of stability, that something like this could exist. And of course, now it has been created in a lab, but it only lasted for a couple of seconds. Gene, how do you reconcile Bob's version of what 115 is like, stable, 500 pounds of this stuff, with the reality of what scientists have found?
Well, not that I'm much of a judge. I mean, from a layman's point of view. First of all, remember, 500 pounds isn't a room full. This is an element heavier than lead, so 500 pounds isn't as much as one would surmise. And all I know about it is it had to be. It wasn't just 115. I believe it was an isotope of 115, and I remember it had to be kept under neutron bombardment at rest because it would be inside this reactor in the disk. It would be they'd actually bombard it with I think a proton, wasn't it, John, that was sent down a tuned tube to actually plug into the nucleus of the 115, which would then
bump it up to 116.
Yeah, make it 116, and then it would fission off some particles, some of which were antimatter, and this antimatter would be reacted with matter, and then the heat from that reaction would be converted to electricity, and this is how the disk was powered. So that's the that's the basic story of 115. And in even back then in Van Nostrand's Scientific Encyclopedia, I think it was the Lab for Heavy Ion Research or something like that at Darmstadt, Germany, had done some research, and they were sneaking up on 115 but hadn't created. And since then, they have created some 115 in a lab, but if you actually examine how they do some of these experiments, I mean, they'll bombard this and bombard that and move particles at a significant percentage of the speed of light, and then use this filter or that filter, and so it had to exist and then exist for X amount of seconds or fractions of seconds, and then it decays. So no one's had enough of it, a quantity of it, that they could actually study it and do anything with it, even though they have not only found that it does exist, it's not just a theory, there is an island of stability there, but what they found is that it decays rapidly. But again, the 115 Bob worked with wasn't just 115 like hydrogen is hydrogen. It was an isotope, and there were special properties involved with it, including how you had to keep it when it wasn't in action.
I remember during that tumultuous period when Bob thought maybe his life was in danger, going to his house one night, and he had the 115 in that lead casing, sort of with a bullseye on it in front of his particle accelerator.
Right.
So what was he doing there?
Well, I guess the threat was that he would accelerate particles down and plug in a proton into the one of the. I don't know if he would have been able to achieve the speed or the power to do that, but I doubt that somebody at the OFI would know whether he had that capability or not. And I guess it was a threat to cause an antimatter reaction explosion.
Meaning if they were going to take him out, he was going to take them out.
Everybody was going at the same time, right?
John, you buy the story on 115 based on what you saw with that cloud chamber experiment.
Yeah, and the fact is the 115 was stable. There is an island of stability up there, but 116 is not. And what they were doing is bumping the 115 up to 116 by injecting protons into it. And what it would do is when it got to 116, it would immediately decay. And what would happen is during the decay, it would throw off antimatter, which was mixed with matter to create heat, to create power for the ship. And the other was they could access the gravity A wave. And the gravity A wave they used to access and amplify it to pull space towards them to go hundreds of light years, in a very short second. But naturally occurring element 115 cannot be found anywhere near us. It can only be found in a solar system much larger, is the way Bob explained it. The two main factors which determine the residual matter that remain after the creation of a solar system is the amount of electromagnetic energy and the amount of mass present at the time of the creation of that solar system. A much larger solar system than the one Earth is in would have to have been created to have element 115 occurring as a natural element. So, no, there's no possibility that it's here or it could be mined here, which some people have said, and there's no possibility that they could actually make it. It would take years and years and years of pumping protons and years of electromagnetic energy to make the element 115 that Bob had.
There's a story that of something that happened that hasn't really been told that you guys have not discussed in public, but at one point this piece that Bob had was stolen, wasn't it?
There was three, and two were stolen. Bear me out on this, Gene, and then and then one we have no comment on.
Gene, who stole it? Who stole the piece?